the honor of introducing my husband this evening. I did write some stuff down. I don't know exactly what parts of his story he's sharing, but we've fought some pretty big spiritual warfare in our home in the last month. One of which was COVID hit me last Saturday. So anyway, so I have COVID fog, so I brought my list of things to say about him. But anyhow, I know that something wonderful that he's going to say tonight is going to be impactful because of how much the enemy has been trying to keep it from happening. So our story together started 21 years ago on a blind date, and we had both moved here for our careers. Shane was working at KDOT and I was teaching in Lenora, and it was a blind date, and we were married 9 months later, and the rest is kind of history, like they say. But neither one of us really, we hadn't accepted Christ. I mean, we had faith in our families, but we made the choice to kind of grow that together as a couple, and even then it still took several years, which he may touch on, I'm not sure. But when we started our walk with Christ, neither one of us could have imagined the journey we'd be on, and that there would be so many kind of dark places that it would take us. But I can't imagine, I thank God every day that he brought us together, and that has brought us closer to him, because I don't know how we would have gotten through to see the light that he's shown us without him. And so I'm sure he'll kind of go into some of that. You can see our girls aren't here. That's part of that spiritual warfare again, too. When we planned this, when he picked this date, there wasn't anything on the school calendar. And since there's been the Scholars Bowl, which one of our girls is involved in, and basketball game, which the other should have been at, but has strep throat. And so our girls couldn't be here tonight. But I did ask them each what they loved and admired about their dad. And so I'm just going to let you know kind of what they said. So Natalie's 18, our oldest, and if you know her, she's going to KU in the fall, and Natalie has lots of interesting questions at times, and I just kind of look at her like, how did you come up with that? Where did that come from? And what she said was she loves that Dad always answers all those weird questions she has, or tries to, and then she gets herself in these situations, like her window won't roll up. She rolls it down and it's cold and the window won't roll up. And so the other thing that she loves about her dad is that he can fix any of that and comes running when she calls in her panicked moments. She doesn't call me, she calls him, because he's the calm, cool, collected, gonna take care of it. So I love to watch the two of them laugh after the fact when they tell the stories over and over. It's pretty fun to watch them replay those stories after she's not panicking. But, and then our Lauren is 17, and she's most like her daddy. And I found it pretty interesting that when I asked her what she admires most about Shane, that most of the qualities she shared are qualities she shares with him, that he's sweet and caring and funny. She loves that he always knows just what to do, and she said that he makes her feel safe. So I love to watch the two of them, and especially when she's doing her thing with cheer and dance, just to watch Shane watch her is pretty special. And then our 8-year-old, Miss Shelby, she keeps us on our toes and has made him lose a few more hairs and me get a few more gray ones. But her first answer to the question was, well, Mom, he's the only one that has blue eyes in our family. And I was like, yeah. Okay, so give me something else. Go a little deeper. And she said, oh, yeah. And I like when he plays with Ruby, which is our puppy. I like when he plays with Ruby, and I'm like, okay, anything else? Oh, and he makes silly faces all the time at me. Okay, anything, what you got, Shelf? Like, what else makes you happy? Why do you love him so much? And then she said, he makes me feel special when he takes me on dates. And so I was like, okay, I'll stop. So she loves her dates, and they have a sweet relationship too. But I'll stop here. I'm kind of rambling. That's what I do. Over our 21 years together, I've gotten asked lots of times, does Shane ever talk? Like, he's so quiet, does he ever talk? And I'm like, okay, first of all, he married me, which, hello, I like to talk, and then he has 3 girls, so when does he have a chance to talk? But what I always say is, when he speaks, you should listen. So that's my introduction. He's getting ready to speak. You should definitely listen. Thank you all for coming tonight. Here's my husband, Shane.
Thank you. You know, I didn't grow up in the church. We grew up, as we grew up, we lived on the farm, and oftentimes, you know, um, as we went along, we were just busy, and I never even knew really about God. The times when I was in church maybe were, you know, funerals and weddings. Nobody had ever talked to me about God. My grandmother, Bev, she had taken me a few times to church when I was very little, and I still remember those times, but those were few and far between, and then she moved to Florida. As I grew up, I remember in high school, I remember walking by a church, and I remember thinking, what is a church about? What goes on in there, and why do people go to church? You know, because I had never had anybody talk to me about church or God or any of that stuff, and I didn't know anything about God, not necessarily that, that I wouldn't choose him. So went to college, and I'm a math science guy, so like I would say that I, believed in evolution, all that stuff that they taught us, just the different things. I thought, I was a good person, but I didn't really have anything to judge that against. I judged that against maybe other people I was around. I would also, consider myself at the time pro-choice. I thought, people should have the, right to choose what happens. And so as I moved to Norton here, and Ruth Bird, of course, my hairdresser, she invites me or gives me Mandy's phone number, invites me to call her, to go on a date. And I didn't call her right away, but I just had this weird feeling like that the person on the other side of the phone number was the person I was supposed to spend the rest of my life with. And so I called her, and we went on our date, and I just clicked it off. Like things were easy to talk about, things were very easy just to talk, and things were comfortable. And about 2 months after that, I asked her to marry me, and she said yes. And one of the things that I remember vividly is going to our very first marriage counseling sessions, and the pastor, we had gone to church a few times. We had gone because Mandy's landlords at the time had asked her to go to church, and so we were going to church in Lenora at the United Parish there, and we had gone a few times, and but I just still didn't know anything. And on our very first, we decided to have our wedding at the First Presbyterian in Hayes, and our first counseling session, the pastor said, "What do you think? What makes you think you guys have the right to have a wedding in our church?" And we both looked at each other, and we didn't really have a good answer. We didn't really have, our answer was because everybody has weddings in a church, and that's where, we want to have it in a church. So we left that night, and we kind of wondered whether or not, we should continue on that path with that pastor. But that first night, we filled out this compatibility thing, and And we come back the next night, and he's like, I have to apologize to you guys for asking you that question. He's like, you guys have scored the highest on this quiz that I have ever given. He's like, I think you guys are meant to be together. And so then we started our life. We had some ups and downs, and we got to a point where we both came into the relationship. We both had some debt. We were both college graduates, and so we had student loans. We had credit cards. Of course, nobody's ever told us the credit cards were bad. The credit cards were, something to build your credit with, of course. And so, we're building. We're buying stuff. We bought a new house. Somebody loaned us the money to buy a house with $5,000 down, and so we bought a house. We had our girls, and then somebody also loaned us the money to buy a brand new van. So we bought a brand new van, and as we were going along, we were spending a lot of money to keep up with everybody, to keep up with just the people around us. We thought, well, they have this, so why shouldn't we, right? So we continued to kind of spend ourselves underneath, but then we also had some unexpected things happen. And so if you don't have savings and unexpected things happen, what do? You borrow more money, right? So during this time we started out at the United Methodist or United Parish down in Lenora, and we after we moved up here, we started going to the Methodist Church here in Norton. We were going to church, and we got involved. We did all those things, but we still didn't have a saving faith. We still didn't understand our faith, but we were going to church, and sometimes not consistently, because of course we didn't have that faith. We sometimes were hit and miss, and we got involved. We got in committees. We got involved with the bridge service there at the church, and they needed a computer guy for the PowerPoint. So of course, I was default computer guy for that, and so we get involved in the church, and I'm getting to where we're Mandy left her job down in Lenora. We had some stuff where we thought about moving away, but we got to where our marriage was struggling a little bit. Our finances were a struggle. Our relationship, we didn't talk a lot. At times when we did that period of time, Mandy got to stay home with the girls, but oftentimes I would come home and she would leave to go sell jewelry or something else. And so we got to the point in time where I was realizing that church, I wasn't getting out of church what all the people that go to church were getting out of it. I knew I was missing something. I wasn't understanding why everybody come to church, because what I was getting from Sunday school and from an hour on Sunday during the church service wasn't enough to keep me coming. It wasn't. I didn't understand, and things got to where I got to the point where I was playing video games all the time. I would go and play video games, and so video games was kind of, I call it my vice, where I was, struggling with so many things that I would like to play video games. They were strategy games to where I could bury stuff in the back of my head. One of the descriptions is trying to take all the stuff that you're concerned about, the stuff you're worried about, and push it to the back of your head as much as you can. Of course, and plenty of people have different things that they did to do that stuff, but mine was video games at the time, and so what happens when you continue to push it to the back of your head? At some point in time, it explodes. It all comes back, right? It all comes back up. So you would have those times where, just everything would flood into the front and explode, and you just, it got to the point where, like, church wasn't, something but a place I wanted to be at times. But so I knew I was missing something. So I started looking for some of that, like trying to figure it out. Like, I got invited to a men's group that the Christian church was putting on by Chuck Look, because he had been invited by Alan Hale. And so we went to the Rock, and there was a sign up. I didn't know anybody there, other than Chuck and a couple other people, but, I didn't really know anybody there. I'm quiet, I don't talk, so I'm pretty much just standing there. And one of the things that they had that night was they had a sign up for 3 Bible studies. The people that were doing the Bible studies was Barney Cox, Daryl Boston, and Merlin Collo. And, I signed up for all of those and went. And the big one for me was the very last one, was the one with Merlin Collo. And the Bible study was on the narrow path and a cord of 3 strands. I don't know if that's what the title of it was, but it was just a Bible study that he had written out. I remember he had a rope with 3 strands, and it was woven together, and he had taped on this that he had wound up, and those were for the different times that he had gone through in his life. So, like this point in time, it might have had a taped around, blue or green or whatever, and for him and this rope, it was the different rough times in his life. And so he would ask, he's, of course, the narrow way is Jesus. And so he's asking questions to the different groups and the different nights. And, I'm sitting there with my Bible, but I haven't read my Bible all that much. I was going to Sunday school, but like reading it consistently, no. Did I have any of my Bible memorized? No. And so those guys around there, he would ask them a question, and they would be, it's this verse, this book, this verse, this, here, and it says this. And they're not looking at their Bible. And so then, of course, we would all open up our Bibles, and we would read the verse, and it's almost word for word what all those guys were saying. And just night after night of that, just was amazing to me. Like, these guys knew this stuff. They had it, on their hearts. And, it came to the last night of this Bible study, and I didn't know what happened, but I remember just having this, just a split second is probably what it was, but I remember closing my eyes, and I just had all these pictures of this times where God was with me, through my life. And, even though I didn't know him, but he was there. It's like I was here at this time and this time. And I gave my life to Christ that night. Bad part about it is nobody in that Bible study knew. Nobody knew. I didn't necessarily know what happened to me, that night. I didn't understand. I went away with this, that weight lifted, like this peace that, to this day is so hard to describe. And I, so I went home and, I didn't really know who to share that with. I didn't really have, anybody, and I didn't necessarily look to anybody to find out why, what I had just gone through. And so for me, being the learner, being the guy that likes to learn stuff, I started picking up books. And so I started reading Christian books. I started reading my Bible. But I needed the Christian books at that point in time to help me understand what I was reading in the Bible. And I found a couple of my favorite books are Your Own Jesus by Mark Hall. He's the Casting Crowns lead singer and youth pastor. And Crazy Love by Francis Chan. And through reading those books, just helped me understand a lot better, helped me understand God's love for me, helped me understand what it meant to have your own Jesus, to have your own relationship with God, and just being able to go through that. And so the bad part about that is I didn't necessarily, at the time, I didn't necessarily know what it was. I didn't share it with it. I didn't share it with a lot of people. I didn't have a lot of close Christian friends. But one of the things I was blessed with is I had a Christian friend at work. He would ask me questions, like about my faith and about just different things, and plenty of things that were more just questions for me to ponder and for me to go find out things. And so that was one of the ways that I started growing my faith. And at that point in time, we got that was in January of 2009. And so we're getting to the end of 2009, and our finances are struggling very badly. And I remember having this prayer. Let me go back a little bit. One of my things too was I was always trying to find the book to teach me how to pray. Like, I didn't know how to pray, and I thought there should be a book. There should be something that teaches you how to pray. And so I'm looking for books or something that would, teach me how to pray. And I found this book. It was How to Pray by John Wesley, but basically what it has in it is a bunch of scripture, Bible verses, and basically prayers out of the Bible. And this is how you pray. And so I remember praying for God to show me how to pray. And of course, the bridge service come along, and I started to be included in the prayer before the bridge service. And so one of the things that, was way outside of my comfort zone was praying out loud with other people, but that afforded me the opportunity to hear everybody else pray, in the group around. And so, they didn't know it, but they're helping me learn how to pray, just by praying out loud in that group and in that circle. And so, I kind of realized that, that prayer is more just, being kind of honest with God and communicating with God. And so we get towards the end of that year, and our finances are struggling pretty bad from all the overspending we're doing. Mandy does not have a job at this time. She's staying home with Lauren. Natalie's in kindergarten, and we had talked a little bit, and I had asked her, to apply for jobs and to find something, but she didn't want to apply to any job that, because of daycare, she didn't want to have to put Lauren into daycare. And so, I mean, we're needing, by this time, just to even pay the bills, we're needing her to have a job that would pay her somewhere, around $1,000 a month. And so my prayer one night was something like, God, I don't know where this is going to come from. I know Mandy's not looked for any jobs, but I need her to have a job. And I need her to have a job that daycare is kind of taken care of. Like that's not an issue. And like I just remember crying and being emotional even, like just pouring my heart out to God. And Mandy later on, as we discussed, she had a similar prayer during that time. And the very next day, Mandy comes to work, and I was like kind of looking for me, and she had been offered a job by Mr. Roy to fill in for the half-day sub for Nan Smith. He had arranged it to where Lauren was in early childhood. She was in early childhood for half a day, so she could move into the afternoon class. We would just have to find, a little bit of time to where somebody could watch her. And so we were able to work that out. Mandy was able to have a job and turned into a full-time job after that. One of the other things is, as a lot of this stuff was going on, like trying to trust God, people always have a question about trusting God. And for me at this point in time, as we're going through this, like I have no reason to not trust God. For me, I mean, it was pretty easy for me to trust God because he had brought me through the stuff, out of the stuff, bad stuff that I was. Like I had that time from where I was in the darkness to where I'm in the light, and so for me that was a pretty easy trusting God and trusting that he would do things that he was good. And so as we go along, I found out that at our Methodist church, there's things called lay servants. Lay servants would fill in for pastors when they couldn't be around, like they couldn't give a sermon on a Sunday or whatever. And so we're talking to a guy that doesn't really speak very well to other people, just carry on a conversation. A guy that's dropped out of his college speech class because he just wasn't doing very well, that type of a guy too. Finding out about this lay servant, I wanted to go to these classes to learn how to speak, to fill in for the pastor. And so I started going into those classes, and I remember getting the responses. I'm telling people, you're going to do what? God had prompted me to do this, and so I was like, I'm going to go do this. And so I started through those courses, and I filled in for the Norton and Almena Church a couple times, and I filled in for the Norton and Clayton and Norcator, Clayton, and Jennings Methodist Church, and Jack Kurzenbrock, who was, and Jane Kurzenbrock, who two people that invested a lot of time through all of that. Kind of forgot them in the original story, but they invested a lot of time. Jack was the pastor at United Parish when we first started going to church, and so they had spent a lot of time just inviting us over and talking to us and just carrying on us, I guess. And so Jack, as I'm starting to do this lay servant stuff, he invites me. He was doing Maple Grove Church at the time, and he started asking me to fill in for him out there. And so little did I know that he was wanting to be done with Maple Grove Church. And so this was also a slight to go, okay, hey, you want to take my place out at Maple Grove? And so I started after that. I started doing, in 2013, I started doing the monthly rotation out there doing sermons, and I did that for 5 years to 2018. And one of the things, like, as I would give the sermons out there, I would pray every week for the message. I would pray for, what am I supposed to say, and I would spend a lot of my first half of my week doing that. And of course I had a full-time job. And so God would seem to always give me something that I need to be talking to him about. And I just remember too, having some Sundays being like, God, who in Maple Grove Church needs to hear this message? I would just think that, because I didn't really think, the message I was supposed to give would touch anybody. And I always had the blessing of either somebody in the congregation would come up to me after the church service and say, I needed to hear that message. Or, they would, there would be a family that I hadn't been there come that Sunday. And so maybe that message was for that family. But as we went along, we during this whole time, we really never did really fix our finances. So we still have that to deal with. And in June of 2014, we bought the Dave. I was praying to God about, we were in over our heads with debt. We were $50,000+ in debt, of bad debt. So we're talking like credit cards and stuff like that. And so if you can imagine what the payments were on that, like the country, had gone through some financial crisis, and so credit cards were way worse than they were when we started. And so we were getting to the point where we'd have to file bankruptcy or something. And so we just asked God to help us out, because there was no way that I could see the way we could do to get out of it. And so as we were going through that, there was 3 or 4 verses that God showed to me. The one was, I don't remember the verse, but it's the one about kind of testing God with money, testing him with giving. And one of the others was being a joyful giver. So, here we're in debt, and of course he's showing me to be a cheerful giver. And he shows me the verse to be content with what we have. One of those times where we're going through that, like, our cars were 14 years old and over 100,000 miles, but, that was something that we had to be content with. Different things as we were going through. And so as we were going through, we're giving, we're not giving, 10%. We're giving, kind of giving what we were giving at that point in time. And but we're being joyful about giving it. So one of the things that God showed me is, if you're going to give it, if you regret giving that, it's not being joyful, and you're not giving it for God's glory. You're not giving that for God's glory. So we were giving joyfully what we were giving, what we could, and we started through Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace University was something he showed us. And so we started through that. We bought the home course because, of course, I don't want anybody else to know what we're going through, of course, right? And so we buy that home course and we start going through that. And one of the things he has you do is go through your checkbook and, write out all this stuff you're spending money on and, just to get a visual of what you're doing, where you're spending your money. And I remember, we were spending $600 or $700 a month to go out to eat at the time, which was more than our mortgage was, and just a big shock to us. And one of the things he had for you to do was for a couple like us, is to set aside, $1,000 in your savings. So we did that. We were able to do that fairly quickly. Because you're going to have problems. And you're going to have something that you're going to need to spend money on. And so we went through, doing the cash thing where we had cash envelopes. We had a certain amount of money we could spend on certain stuff. And it was a little rough to start out with. There were some months where we had nothing left in the envelope. And we were still yet to get paid for a little while. In some of those envelopes. So definitely taught us, pretty quickly, how to manage our money. And we're getting, some of our debts paid off. During that time, God blessed us in finances. There was no explaining it other than just God, just money. We would get money. So our finances, we're doing, we went through and got to where we were paying down our debts, and we were hoping to have it done pretty quickly, but it ended up taking 4 years to pay off all of our debts other than our house. We didn't have any debt on any of our cars or anything like that, and we are still like that today. We do owe on our house, but we don't owe on any of our vehicles or any of that stuff. We save money and we pay cash. If something breaks down on our car, we pay cash. If we want something, we pay cash for it. And so we just one of those things where, God bringing us through all of that. And during that time, even, we had some things happen, and during that time, we were able to help pay for stuff, even while we were still trying to pay down our debt. And it was just amazing to see that we could pay cash for that stuff. And one of the things as we were kind of going through that time as well is I started struggling in my faith again, kind of started struggling in my faith. I remember would be at probably in the beginning part of 2015. I remember walking into my house and seeing my Bible sitting next to my chair, knowing I needed to read it and not wanting to read it at all. I remember my books were right by my chair. I didn't want to read them. My church, I think, was going a little rough. It wasn't necessarily someplace we wanted to be at the time either, and so I was just really struggling with stuff, and we ended up starting to come to church here at the Christian church, and men's encounter was a thing, and I remember being asked several times to go to men's encounter, but it was just the one night I was standing out in the lobby and um, waiting to pick up Natalie from Awana, and Jody Enfield walks by, and he's just walking by, and he goes, "You going to men's encounter?" And keeps on walking, and it was just that, like, just stopped, pointed at me, "You going to men's encounter?" That night I signed up for men's encounter. It just, one of those things, as I say, my testimony, I guess, is you never know who you're impacting and what you're doing by the things that you do in your life. And so, just something simple as asking a guy to a men's group, something as simple as just continuing to ask, "Are you going to go to men's encounter? Do you want to come to church? Do you know who God is?" Some of those questions, they're kind of simple questions, but you don't know who you might be called to see or talk to or ask those things, or if you're the right person at the right time to get them to move to that next step. So I went to men's encounter and come back, and men's encounter was a big thing for me that I needed, because as I was struggling in my faith, and it allowed me to understand my faith a whole lot more than I had gotten, probably over those previous 6 years, too, because it just helped me understand all the different things that were going on. It helped me draw closer to God. It helped me leave some stuff behind that was still dragging, me there. And one of the things that we did when we came back, as a group, we decided to read a chapter in the Bible a day and email about it. And so it started with, it was only a group of about, I think, eight or 10 people in our core group. So we were going to start this, reading a chapter a day and emailing out. And so we started doing that, and I used it as kind of selfish for me. I wanted it to be kind of my checks for reading the Bible every day, and so reading a chapter in a book in the Bible every day, I pull out some verses, and then I would write what God was speaking to me or in it and send it out in the email. That was in April of 2015, and we started doing that, and I'm still sending that email out every day. One of the things that over the years is I think I've missed less than a handful of days over those years reading a chapter in the Bible. And for me, that's one of the big things that keeps me grounded in my faith. One of the big things in Your Own Jesus by Mark Hall is he talks about what he was filling himself with. So he was talking about he liked hard rock. So that was something he was listening to at the time. He liked horror movies. That was something he liked at the time. But yet he was a youth pastor. And so for him, it became a realization that if he's gorging on the non-Christian music and horror movies, when somebody asks him a question about, when somebody's asking him a question, one of the youths is asking him a question, what do you want the first thing to be coming to mind? You don't want it to be the horror movie, right? You don't want it to be the non-Christian music. He came to a realization that the things that you fill your body, you fill your mind with and your soul with, are the things that come back out. And so that was a definite reality check for me, is that I needed that. I needed the checks and balances, and I used that as the opportunity at the beginning to start a habit of reading my Bible every day. And so I'm reading my Bible every day and doing that. And over the years, how many times has there been where I am doubting whether or not I should be doing that or not, right? So as I'm going through, the times I get to start going through my head, nobody's reading this, nobody, it's not, you could read your chapter a day by yourself. You could still do this without that, and some of those thoughts would go through my head over the years, and every time that those thoughts came through my head, somebody would either email me back and say, "Thank you for these words, they were just what I needed today," or somebody would stop me in public and say, I read your emails every day. And just so over the years, like everybody, just every time that I needed that little bit of confirmation of, should I still be doing this? It was always there to prompt me back. And it's always a different person every time. And, there are, over the time, when I think I email, I don't know, it's like 85 people a day or in that email. It's not a huge chunk, but a lot. It grew over the years. And I don't believe everybody reads it, but, every time that I've needed a confirmation, somebody has come back. And so that's one of my things as I thought about over, as I would write sermons or as I sent out the email, the one thing that you think about is if it can impact one person. Whatever my story is tonight, it doesn't have to impact everybody here, but if it could impact one person, that's the big thing. Also, I went back in August of that year with my dad and my stepdad to Encounter, and so I went with them, and I couldn't really tell if they had a good, if they got out of it what I did, or whether or not it was a good thing. My dad would come back and he would go to church and he would go to Sunday school whenever he was here, but he never really decided to go to church when he was at home. So, I didn't think that had kind of done him. And so one of the things as we were going through the years, and this is actually probably quite a bit earlier, one of my prayers always was, God, how do I bring the people around me and in my family closer to God? How do I bring them to that relationship? And, I would pray it all the time, and I would always seem to get the same answer. He would say, the further you go in your walk, in your faith, the further the people around you will come. And that's what I would get my answer every time. And so that was also one of the things that pushed me in my faith, is wanting to see other people have that faith as well. One of the things Mike, he would come to the house after men's encounter, and he'd always have some questions whenever he came to visit about God or about some scripture verses or something when we're hanging out by the barbecue outside the house or whatever. And so I remember those times as well. One of the things that we did after that is had a couple of guys that, we do after men's encounter, you do a post encounter for 6 weeks. And we got done with the 6 weeks, and there was a couple of guys that I was friends with that decided we'd like to keep this going. And so we started meeting together every week for a Bible study, to share how our lives were going, how our things were going. And it started off, it was George Boutwell and Scott Kentfield, and we had times where we met here, but when we got to the point, they both at the time were members of the Church of God, and so we started meeting over there because they both had keys, and it was just kind of became easier to have it over there. And so, we had some people, different people added in over the years, and kind of ebbed and flowed as far as how many people were coming on a regular Tuesday. It got down to 2 for a period of time, and we just continued to meet and kept each other accountable and continue to do Bible studies. That Bible study still meets on Tuesday nights at 7 o'clock at the Church of God. And we go through Right Now Media and still have people attending. Over the years, sometimes it's been, people from 3 or 4 different churches going to it. So that's one of the things we did as well to kind of the reason why we started it was that cord of 3 strands to keep us, part of that is God, but to keep us accountable to each other, to continue our growth in our faith, to be able to do that. Some of the things that, as I thought back on my faith journey, and those guys memorizing those verses and having those ready to go led me to start helping with Awana, helping with 3rd and 4th grade T&T boys, just because that was such an impactful thing for me to know somebody had memorized verses, that was something that I wanted to be a part of, and that was a ministry that I was called to and be a part of. And they can drive you nuts, sometimes, but 3rd and 4th grade boys, but they can also ask some pretty deep questions at times and help you grow your faith too during those times. And just those types of things are big things that I need even for my own faith, to continue that service and continue to grow your faith. And then came Christmas of 2017. My dad had forgot his medicine at home, and we were like, well, we could get your medicine here at the hospital. We could contact them and get the stuff we need, or we can find somebody that we can get it. And I don't know, he was just very angry and it was adamant that he needed to leave and go home and get his medicine. And I don't know, there was just this look in his eye that I'd never only seen one other time in my life, a very rough time with him. And he changed. I don't know what exactly was affecting him, and I tried to call and talk to him a couple times. And I don't know, my worst fear was that, the evil one was getting to him. And, I struggled to talk to him. I struggled to be able to communicate with him. The things he was doing weren't nice. They weren't great things, and I was pretty concerned to where he was going, and one of those times where I felt pretty hopeless. And when you feel pretty hopeless, where do you turn to? If you're a Christian and you have faith, it's the only place to turn to is God, of course. And so part of my concern with him was, I was pretty sure he didn't have a saving faith, and I see him going down this dark path. And so my prayer was, we're wanting him to go to counseling, we're wanting him to do something, but of course he would have to choose that. So one of my hopes was, let's see if we can get him to, was praying for his salvation, and one of my hopes was maybe we can get him to another men's encounter, maybe that would help him out. And so he was going to go, and he was backing out, and he was going to go, and he was going to back out. And my brother came out with him, or came out to go to a men's encounter as well. And so he went to a men's encounter for that time, and he wouldn't talk to me, which I didn't necessarily need him to talk to me. I was just hoping he would talk to other people and asked other people to talk to him. And as we were going through the different times, he went up for the altar call when they had an altar call, and later in the day on Saturday, would have been, I think, earlier in the morning on Saturday, he came to me, tears streaming down his eyes, and asked if I would baptize him. And, of course I was going to baptize him, and so him and my brother both got baptized. I baptized both of him and my brother, but I still didn't really talk to my dad. He didn't talk to me other than doing that. And so we came back, and I didn't necessarily handle the situation very well when we came back, and got again to where he wouldn't talk to me, and I didn't talk to him in the right manner. And my mom stayed with me for a little while there, but then she ended up going back home, and a couple of the conversations that she would talk to me as he started to change. He would talk to her more, like he wasn't talking to her beforehand. He was talking to her, he was being nice. So I thought, I believed he was saved at this point in time and thought things were going well, but I still hadn't gotten to be able to talk to him about his faith. He's still a new believer. He was just like me, where he didn't know didn't know what to do, what his faith meant now. And Mandy and I went to Weekend to Remember by Family Life, and we needed to work on the communication in our marriage, because at times it wasn't very good. And so we went and we had a great weekend, worked on a lot of stuff, and we on the way back we were memorizing Philippians 4:8 and 9. To be able to focus on what is true, what is right, what is noble, what is lovely, what is praiseworthy. Think about these things. That night, my mom went home and found my dad had committed suicide. So as we ended up, Mandy and I drove up there, and the only thing we knew what to do at the time was to reach out to our faith family. So we reached out to our faith family and asked them to pray. Nobody wants to go through that. One of the things that, having that faith family, is spread, through the groups that we've done, like Men's Encounter, things like that. And I'm getting texts from guys from Men's Encounter, saying, we saw him, we saw he was changed. We saw him give his life to Christ. We know he's saved, That's a question in the church that's kind of controversial, whether or not, that happens. But one of the things going through a time like that is there's never a good time, but if not going through, being able to read the Bible and having that be the first thing that you do every day helped me keep my focus on God. And so when we go through that time, your focus is set on God. You're not thinking of other stuff. Your focus is on God. And so, that's the biggest, advantage that we had of going through that time of our faith, was that, or at least for me, was I was rooted in his word. And I knew where my dad was, and, felt like his funeral was the time, it was a place where I could, maybe the reason is that we could attack somebody else, And so I picked some verses and read some verses at the funeral, and, I don't know where that goes, but I had a couple of the guys my relatives come up afterwards and say, I don't know how you got up there and said that stuff. I don't know how you could do that, how you could keep that straight. And so, I was able to talk to them a little bit. Who knows where that goes, but I don't know. But one of the times I was at my lowest, during that time I was sitting with Mandy on our couch, and I don't know how much everybody believes stuff, but I felt him give me a hug. It's hard to describe, but I knew he's fine. Doesn't make it any easier to lose somebody and to go through that and be the one left here. We continue to miss him. I'll have good memory of him. What's with him holding Shelby after he came back from Men's Encounter? So then we think, as we're moving on from that, which you don't just move on, but Mandy became pregnant later that year. So we're like, okay, maybe that, we weren't planning on having a baby. We weren't, you know, it was the last thing on our minds. And here Mandy's pregnant, and so we're like, maybe that's the good news, you know, like out of all this, we get some good news that Mandy's pregnant. And one of the things that I'd never told anybody about early on in my faith, when I would pray to God, he would tell me this, like, be prepared to lose your wife. I was like, why would God tell you that? Like, why would he ever tell you that? So I always thought, like, that was not God, that was me or something, I don't know. Like, but like over the years, like he would continue to tell me that. Be prepared to lose your wife. And I never told anybody that because I just thought it was ridiculous. Like, why would he tell me that? Least of all, I'm going to tell my wife because she wouldn't have been able to handle it. But as we go on further, we go into November, and you know, we realize something's wrong, and we rush to the hospital, and Mandy's only 16 weeks along, and we know we're going to lose Bryce. He comes out, and like, even at 16 weeks, this is just a perfect little human being. They're just not very big, but still just perfect. And so the nurses are trying to, are just going about the routine, and one of the nurses, like, just pushes on Mandy's tummy, because after you've given birth, normally they're wanting them to just push on his thumb, and the next thing you know, there's, I guess you can say the story, but she's losing so much blood, and I look over at Mandy, and she says, I don't feel good. And you see the doctors and the nurses, like, just scrambling as fast as they can. The one that gets the IV, they got an IV and Mandy, and I had never seen anybody squeeze the bag just to get fluids into somebody. Like, the grief, I mean, just the looks on their face, you know, I knew, and the look on Mandy is, I knew it wasn't good, and God says, this is the time. And what do you do? Like, there's nowhere else to turn but God, right? I mean, and so I just prayed. You know, as you ladies, they yell at there's telemed stuff, and they're yelling at them to get a life flight in, and I mean, just the panic in the room is just hard to describe. And the flight crew comes in, and they look at her, and like, they're you can see the looks on their face even, and what those guys see every day. And I mean, basically they just, as fast as they could, they basically just wrapped her up, everything and all. Like they just took the blankets and everything that she was already laying on. They like took it up, wrapped her up, got her on the thing, took her out. It's hard to be the one staying here, being stuff. And of course, then too, what you're reaching out is you're reaching out your church family. Like we're in a building that's called a church, but like church is the people. Like church is those people that you've connected with, the faith family, the faith church. And so, like, I'm notifying everybody I can think of to pray. And we're blessed to still have Mandy here. We're blessed to have church family in Hayes that, came and prayed over her and, we didn't ask them, they just show up, people from here couldn't necessarily get down there fast enough, or quickly, and so they came and prayed. They came and prayed over several different people came and prayed over her and our family. So I guess my one of the things that I've know is the power of prayer always, God's answered, blessed a lot of us and answered a lot of my prayers over the years. He's not answered a lot of them over the years, but I guess one of the things that I would encourage you is to make sure that you're rooted in God's word, that you're praying, that you're keeping that communication open with God, and that you're listening and aware of the opportunities that you have to be praying for somebody, to be the one person that invites them to church, the one person that invites them to men's or women's encounter, the one person that maybe helps God change their lives. It's not. God gets all the glory in all of it. It was nothing I ever did. It's nothing that individually any of us could do on our own power. It's only through the power of God. That's all I have.
I'm going to see if I can read now. No, Shane, thank you. This life can be tough. I think just when I see people get up here and tell their story, and I see you guys tell your story, it's, God's with us through all those moments in our life, and when we stop and we say them out loud, we realize just how close He is. He doesn't promise that everything's going to be good in this life. Like you said, the enemy relentlessly pursues you, but we relentlessly pursue God. the way that Jesus did. And, I think it's so real that we're on this, we sometimes take it for granted if we've been a Christian for a while that, sometimes it's that journey and just like, asking more questions, trying to figure out who God is, how do I get close to him, and things get in the way in life. And, it says in John 16, I always go back to this, that in 33, Jesus says, I've told you these things that you may have peace. You will have suffering in this world, but be courageous. I have conquered the world. And I think that's why we have hope and have peace, because Jesus went to the cross for us, and he took sin to the grave and came out on the other side with victory, so that we can go with him someday. And I admire you for you guys have gone through a lot, but you've stayed faithful to a God sometimes you've questioned, but those questions have been good questions, right? And they've always led you guys to a path where God says, I'm going to get you. I got people, and that's the thing about the church, is if we do this right, which we don't always do it right, we're just regular people trying to do what God's asked us to do and trying to be faithful, and we make mistakes. But we need to be there for each other when times are tough and when times are good too, because there's hope. I turn back to John 14. I love this between John 13 and 17. Nate touched on it Sunday. But in the first few verses of that, it says, "Don't let your heart be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me. In my Father's house there are many rooms. If not, I would have told you. I'm going away to prepare a place for you. If I go away and prepare a place for you, I will come again and take you to myself, so that where I am you may be also. You know the way to where I am going." Lord, Thomas said, "We don't know where you're going. How can we know the way?" And Jesus told him, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you know me, you will also know my Father from now on, and you do know him and have seen him." And I think we ask that question sometimes, and he says, "I'm the way, the truth, and the life. Follow me." And I was there, with your dad and you and Men's Encounter, and seeing him, on his knees, crying and talking to God, and you baptizing him, and I have no doubt where he's at, and where your son's at, because I think that they're all there. Anybody that's lost kids, you said they're perfect, just a little person, right? Because we're created in the image of God. That's so important. We talked about a deal the other day. Just a lady had a vision of being in heaven, and she saw a little boy running around. And she said, "Who is that?" And God said, "That's your son." He says, "That was 48 years ago." He says, "Time doesn't matter here. It's just a peaceful place." And he's prepared a place for all of us. And if you haven't made that decision, as you can see from Shane's story, we can have this life when it's not perfect and not have God, and it can be a real hell. Or we can have this life when we can have God, and we have his peace and his love and his power, and we have a church family. And so if you don't have that, get it. Talk to us. We're going to have a time of an altar call, or if not, like Shane said, there's a time he made that decision. Make that decision, but come talk to us later. Come talk to somebody. Help get along that path. If you need a time of rededication, but I'm going to pray for you. Heavenly Father, Lord, we thank you for being our God. And when times when we don't know what we're doing, and we're scared in this life, and we don't know where to turn, Lord, we know that you are the Almighty Father and the Creator of all, and that you love us, and you created us in your image, and you sent your Son to the cross for our sin, and resurrected him on the third day, and we have a chance for hope, not only just for heaven, but to spread to other people in this life that sometimes is very cruel. Lord, I pray for anybody in this room that has, you're tugging on their heart to change something or to accept you. We're out on Facebook. Lord, I pray that, pray this prayer that they pray with me, that just, Lord, please move in my life. I accept you, Lord. I accept you into my heart. I need peace. I need your love. I need acceptance. I'm ready to repent of all my sin and be baptized. And Lord, I pray that if people out there have made that prayer, that they do feel the overwhelming love that you have for us. I thank you for Shane and Mandy and their family, Lord, and just the witness to persevering in your love, and hoping that it touches other people's lives. And it's not just hoping, Lord, it does touch other people's lives. And we thank you for them. We ask all these things in Jesus' holy name. Amen.